Hello, my amazing friends. Today, I have something truly fascinating to share with you. So, listen carefully, because this is not just a story about a writer. It is a story that can change the way you think about English, creativity, and success. There was one man whose words transformed the English language forever. A man who understood love, ambition, jealousy, power, and the deepest emotions of the human heart better than anyone else. You have probably heard the names Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth, and Othello. These are not just famous stories. They are reflections of life itself. Many expressions and phrases we use today were inspired by his brilliant mind. His influence on literature and the English language is so powerful that it is impossible to imagine English without him. But have you ever wondered how William Shakespeare became the greatest writer in history? He was not born into wealth. He did not come from a powerful family. He never studied at a great university. Yet he became one of the most famous names the world has ever known. And if you are learning English today, if you sometimes struggle to find the right words, or if you dream of expressing yourself with confidence, then this story is especially for you, because William Shakespeare himself began as an ordinary boy, just like millions of people around the world. This is a story of dreams, struggle, passion, and unstoppable creativity. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this incredible journey. Not only will it improve your English listening skills, but it will also fill your heart with inspiration. Our story begins in April 1564, in a small and peaceful town called Stratford-upon-Avon in England. On a cool spring day, a baby boy was born. His parents, John Shakespeare and Mary Shakespeare, lovingly held him in their arms, never imagining that their son would one day become a legend whose name would live forever. That baby boy was William Shakespeare. Stratford-upon-Avon was not a large city. It was a quiet town with narrow streets, wooden houses, and a beautiful river flowing peacefully through the countryside. People lived simple lives. Farmers worked in the fields, craftsmen made goods with their hands, and traders sold their products in the markets. William's father, John Shakespeare, was a glove maker. He created fine leather gloves and sold them in the local market. He was respected in the community and worked hard to provide for his family. His mother, Mary Arden, came from a wealthy farming family. She was kind, loving, and devoted to her children. William was the third of 8 children. Their home was always filled with laughter, conversations, and the sounds of everyday life. But even as a young boy, William was different. He was curious about everything around him. He carefully listened to how people talked. He noticed how they laughed, how they argued, and how they expressed happiness and sadness. Without realizing it, he was learning lessons that would later help him create some of the greatest characters in history. In those days, there were no televisions, no mobile phones, and certainly no internet. People entertained themselves through stories and performances. Traveling actors often visited the town and performed plays in open spaces. Young William watched them with excitement and wonder. His imagination came alive every time he heard stories of heroes, kings, and ancient legends. He loved listening to folk tales and historical adventures. Each story opened a new world inside his mind. At the age of 7, William began attending school. The school was simple, with wooden benches and strict teachers, but it became the place where his love for learning grew stronger. He studied Latin, history, poetry, and literature. Latin was considered the language of educated people, and young William became very skilled at it. He read the works of great writers from ancient Rome and Greece. He discovered famous names like Ovid, Plutarch, and Virgil there. Stories and ideas deeply inspired him and would later influence many of his own masterpieces. But William was not only interested in books. He loved nature. He enjoyed walking through green fields, watching the flowing river, and listening to birds singing in the trees. He played with his friends, ran through the streets, and enjoyed life like any other child. Yet deep inside him, there was something special. There was a hunger for knowledge, a passion for stories, a love for words. However, life was not always easy. As time passed, William's father began facing financial difficulties. The successful businessman who had once enjoyed respect and prosperity suddenly found himself struggling with debts. The family's situation became difficult. There were times when money was limited and uncertainty filled their lives. Young William noticed the worry in his father's eyes, and the concern in his mother's voice. Through these hardships, he learned an important lesson. Life is full of ups and downs. Success and failure are both temporary. These experiences taught him to understand human emotions deeply, and years later, those emotions would appear in the unforgettable characters of his plays. Even as a child, William had a special relationship with words. He loved creating little poems and rhymes. He enjoyed acting and entertaining people with stories. No one in Stratford-upon-Avon knew that this curious young boy would one day become the greatest playwright the world had ever seen. For now, he was simply William, a boy with big dreams. But those dreams were about to take him far beyond the little town where his extraordinary journey had begun. As the years passed, William Shakespeare continued to grow, and so did his love for stories and learning. By the age of 14, he had already read many books, listened to countless stories, and watched traveling actors perform in his hometown. But life was becoming more difficult. His father's financial troubles were getting worse. The respected businessman who had once enjoyed success was now struggling with debts. The family that had once lived comfortably was facing uncertain times. Young William witnessed everything. He saw how quickly fortune could change. He understood that wealth, status, and happiness were never permanent. But instead of becoming discouraged, these experiences made him wiser, more thoughtful, and more creative. And then, something happened that would change his life forever. By the age of 18, William was no longer a child. He had become a young man, and like many young men, he fell in love. Her name was Anne Hathaway. She was intelligent, kind, and independent. She possessed a maturity that impressed the young William. However, there was something unusual about their relationship. Anne Hathaway was 26 years old, 8 years older than William. In those days, such a difference in age was uncommon, especially when the woman was older than the man. But love does not always follow society's expectations. William loved Anne deeply, and together they dreamed of building a life filled with happiness. Soon, unexpected news arrived. Anne became pregnant before they were married. At that time, society was very strict, and such situations often brought shame upon families. Knowing this, William and Anne decided to marry without delay. In November 1582, at just 18 years of age, William Shakespeare married Anne Hathaway. Life was changing rapidly. Only 6 months after their wedding, Anne gave birth to their first child, a beautiful daughter named Susanna. 2 years later, in 1585, the couple welcomed twins into the world. Their son was named Hamnet, and their daughter was named Judith. At only 21 years old, William Shakespeare was already the father of 3 children. He loved his family deeply, but another challenge stood before him. How would he provide for them? His father's business was still struggling, and William had no secure profession. He had no land. He had no title. He had no great fortune. But he possessed something far more valuable. He possessed imagination. He possessed words. And he possessed a burning desire to create. Then began one of the greatest mysteries in literary history. The years between 1585 and 1592 are often called the lost years. Why? Because historians still do not know exactly what happened during this period. There are very few records, and many questions remain unanswered. For 7 years, William Shakespeare seemed to disappear from history, but several theories have survived. Some historians believe that he worked as a school teacher. Since he had received a good education, many people think he may have taught children or served as a private tutor for wealthy families. Others believe he became involved with a traveling theater company. Perhaps he learned the art of acting while moving from town to town, gaining valuable experience that would later shape his career. Another fascinating story suggests that he got into trouble with the law. According to one popular legend, William was caught hunting deer illegally on the land of a wealthy nobleman. To avoid punishment, he may have been forced to leave Stratford and seek a new beginning elsewhere. No one knows which story is true. Perhaps all of them contain a little truth, or perhaps the real answer has been lost forever. But one thing is certain: those 7 mysterious years transformed William Shakespeare. When he finally reappeared in history, he was no longer just a young man from a small town. He had changed. He had grown, and he was ready for something much bigger. His journey was leading him toward London, a city filled with dreams, opportunities, and fierce competition, a city where actors, writers, and poets struggled every day to make their names known. William had no money, he had no powerful connections, and he had no guarantee of success, but he carried something. Stronger than wealth, he carried talent, he carried determination, and above all, he carried an unstoppable passion for storytelling. Little did he know that London would soon become the place where his dreams would come alive. The world was waiting, and William Shakespeare was about to begin the journey that would make him immortal. By the year 1592, William Shakespeare had arrived in London, and with that, a completely new chapter of his life began. London in the late 16th century was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a city full of energy, ambition, and opportunity. The streets were crowded. Merchants, artists, actors, and poets filled every corner of the city. Theaters were becoming more popular than ever, and people from all walks of life gathered to watch exciting performances. For dreamers and storytellers, London was the place where everything was possible, but success was never easy. When Shakespeare arrived, he was not famous. He had no wealth. He had no powerful friends, and he had no guarantee that his dreams would come true. Yet he refused to give up. Deep inside, he carried something stronger than fear. He carried passion, he carried determination, and he carried a vision that no one else could see. At first, William began working with small theater groups. He learned everything he could. He observed actors carefully. He studied the emotions of people. He watched how audiences reacted to different scenes. Every experience became a lesson. Every performance became a classroom. Soon, he started acting himself, and before long, he began writing his own plays. At first, his plays were simple and entertaining. People laughed, people cheered, and audiences enjoyed the excitement he brought to the stage. But Shakespeare had bigger dreams. He wanted to create stories that touched the human soul. Stories that would make people laugh, cry, think, and reflect on life itself. And slowly, his extraordinary talent began to shine. By 1592, people in London's theater world had started noticing his work. His reputation was growing, but not everyone was happy about his success. One famous playwright named Robert Greene openly criticized him. In a letter, Greene referred to Shakespeare as an upstart crow. He meant that Shakespeare was an outsider, a nobody, someone who was trying to act like a great writer. Many people would have been discouraged by such harsh criticism. But William Shakespeare was different. Instead of becoming angry, he chose to work harder. Instead of responding with words, he responded with excellence. Day after day, he continued writing. Play after play, he continued improving, and little by little, audiences fell in love with his stories. But just as everything seemed to be moving in the right direction, disaster struck. In 1593, a deadly plague spread throughout London. Fear covered the city. Thousands of people became sick. And to stop the spread of the disease, all theaters were closed. Suddenly, actors had no work. Writers had no audiences, and Shakespeare's dreams seemed to face another painful obstacle. But once again, he refused to surrender. He understood something important. When one door closes, another door opens. Since theaters were closed, he turned his attention toward poetry. During this difficult period, Shakespeare wrote two beautiful narrative poems. The first was Venus and Adonis. The second was The Rape of Lucrece. These poems became highly popular. Readers admired his writing. His reputation continued to grow, and for the first time, William Shakespeare began earning significant wealth from his talent. Even Queen Elizabeth I became impressed by his work. The young writer from Stratford-upon-Avon was slowly becoming one of England's brightest stars. Then, in 1594, good news finally arrived. The plague began to disappear. The theaters reopened, and London once again came alive with excitement. For Shakespeare, it felt like a second chance. He returned to the stage with renewed energy and greater confidence. Around this time, he became a member of a famous acting company. known as the Lord Chamberlain's Men. This was not just another theater group. It was one of the finest acting companies in England, and Shakespeare quickly became one of its most important members. He was no longer simply acting in plays, he was creating them. His imagination seemed endless, his words captured emotions that people had never experienced before on stage. He wrote stories filled with love and heartbreak, stories filled with ambition and betrayal, stories filled with jealousy, revenge, and human weakness. Soon, names like Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth, and Othello would become unforgettable. People laughed with his characters, people cried with his tragedies, and audiences saw themselves reflected in his stories. By the late 1590s, William Shakespeare had become one of the most respected playwrights in England. His fame was growing, his influence was expanding, and his name was beginning to spread far beyond London. But Shakespeare was not satisfied. He wanted more. More creativity, more masterpieces, and more stories that would live forever. What happened next would change not only his life, but the history of theater itself. Because soon, William Shakespeare and his fellow actors would build something extraordinary, a place that would become legendary, a place where some of the greatest stories ever written would come to life. That place was called the Globe Theatre. The year was 1599, and something extraordinary was about to happen. By this time, William Shakespeare had already become one of the most respected writers in London. His plays were attracting larger audiences. His reputation was growing rapidly, but Shakespeare and his fellow actors had a bigger dream. They wanted a theater they could truly call their own, a place where imagination could come alive, place where unforgettable stories could be brought to life before thousands of people. And so, Shakespeare and the members of the Lord Chamberlain's Men made a bold decision. Together, they built a magnificent theater. They called it the Globe Theatre. Imagine the scene, a huge circular building standing proudly in London, an open roof. Above, a stage filled with excitement, and thousands of eager spectators, waiting to witness something magical. Rich and poor, merchants and noblemen, young and old, everyone gathered together for one purpose: to experience the power of storytelling. For Shakespeare, the Globe Theatre was much more than a building. It was his dream. It was his kingdom. And it was here that some of the greatest works in human history came to life. At the Globe Theatre, audiences experienced stories unlike anything they had seen before. They witnessed Hamlet, the tragic tale of a prince searching for truth and revenge. They watched Macbeth, a powerful story about ambition, guilt, and the destruction caused by greed. They were moved by Othello, a heartbreaking story of love, jealousy, and betrayal. And they experienced Julius Caesar, a dramatic story filled with politics, loyalty, and conspiracy. These plays were not merely entertainment. They explored the deepest emotions of human nature. They made people question life. They made people understand themselves, and they touched hearts in ways no one had imagined. As the years passed, Shakespeare's success continued to grow. By the early 1600s, he had become one of the wealthiest playwrights in England. Unlike many writers of his time who struggled to survive, Shakespeare enjoyed financial success, owned shares in the Globe Theatre. Every successful performance increased his income. His plays and poems were published and sold across England. People everywhere wanted to read his words. His fame had spread far beyond London, and with fame came wealth. Shakespeare purchased valuable properties and invested wisely. One of his greatest purchases was a beautiful house in Stratford-upon-Avon known as New Place. It was one of the largest and finest homes in the town. The boy who had once grown up in difficult circumstances had now achieved remarkable prosperity. Yet, success and wealth were never enough for him. His mind was always searching for new stories, new emotions, and new masterpieces. Then, in 1603, a major event changed the course of English history. Queen Elizabeth I, who had ruled England for many years, passed away. Her death brought uncertainty, and people wondered what the future would hold. The new ruler was King James I. No, one knew whether the new king would support the theater. Some feared that performances might even be banned, but Shakespeare had no reason to worry. King James greatly admired his work. In fact, the king loved Shakespeare's plays so much that he offered special royal support to his acting company, and soon, something incredible happened: the Lord Chamberlains. Men received a new and prestigious title. They became known as the King's Men. This honor was one of the highest distinctions an acting company could receive. It meant that Shakespeare and his fellow actors now enjoyed the protection and support of the king himself. They performed before members of the royal court. They entertained noblemen and powerful leaders, and Shakespeare's position as England's greatest playwright became stronger than ever. It was an extraordinary achievement. The son of a simple glove maker had risen to become the most celebrated writer in the kingdom, but Shakespeare was far from finished. Between 1603 and 1611, he entered one of the most brilliant periods of his career. His writing became deeper, his ideas became more philosophical, and his understanding of human emotions became even more powerful. During these years, he created some of his greatest masterpieces. He wrote King Lear, a heartbreaking story about family, betrayal, and suffering. He wrote Macbeth, one of the darkest and most unforgettable stories about ambition and destruction, and he wrote The Tempest, a beautiful tale of forgiveness, hope, and new beginnings. These works reflected the wisdom of a man who had experienced both triumph and sorrow. By now, Shakespeare had seen everything. He had experienced struggle. He had experienced fame. He had known wealth, and he had witnessed pain and loss. Of these experiences gave life to his characters. His heroes felt real, his villains felt real, and the emotions in his stories spoke directly to the human soul. By 1611, William Shakespeare had accomplished more than he had ever imagined. He was famous, he was wealthy, he was admired by kings, and his name had become known throughout England. Everything he had dreamed of as a young boy from Stratford-upon-Avon had finally become reality. But after years of success and endless creativity, another chapter of his life was about to begin. A quieter chapter. Chapter that would bring him back to the place where it had all started, back to his beloved hometown, back to Stratford, and toward the final years of a life that had already changed the world forever. Shakespeare's final days were not loud or dramatic, but slow and deeply reflective. There was a quiet acceptance in him, as if he already understood that every story, no matter how powerful, must eventually reach its final page. He spent his last years away from the busy life of London, in a calmer place where time seemed to move differently. The theaters, the applause, the royal attention, all of it had faded into memory. What remained was thought and silence, and words that no longer needed an audience. Retirement was not an escape for him. It was completion, a sign that a true creator never truly leaves his craft. He becomes part of it forever. As his strength slowly declined, he remained mentally sharp and deeply reflective. It is believed that he often thought about the meaning of life, death, and the strange permanence of words compared to the fragility of human life. One day, looking out at the world with a calm expression, he is said to have reflected that he had written about every part of human existence: love, betrayal, ambition, jealousy, hope. And now he was facing the final truth himself, and then came his death. Shakespeare passed away peacefully in 1616. There was no grand event, no dramatic final words recorded for certainty, just a quiet ending to a life that had created countless unforgettable moments for others. His physical presence ended, but nothing about his influence disappeared with him. After his death, something remarkable happened. He did not become a memory that faded, but a presence that grew stronger with time. His absence from the world stage only made his words louder across centuries. He became more than a writer. He became a symbol of human emotion itself, a mirror showing every generation its own desires, fears, and struggles. His legacy lives not in a single place, but in every story of love, loss, ambition, and hope ever written or felt. And his final, timeless message feels like this: life is temporary, but truth expressed through words can outlive time itself. Even today, when someone feels lost or afraid to chase their dreams, his story gently reminds them. If a man from centuries ago can still speak to your heart today, then your voice can also reach a future you cannot yet see. This was his immortality. Not that he lived forever, but that he is still alive in human thought. Before you leave, remember this: you are not just watching a story, you are standing inside one. Just like Shakespeare, you may feel small in a big world. You may feel unheard, unnoticed, or uncertain about your future. But history always proves one thing: the world does not remember comfort, it remembers courage. Shakespeare didn't start as a legend. He started as a human being with doubts, struggles, and dreams. What made him immortal was not perfection, it was persistence, and that same power exists inside you. Your life is also a stage. Every day you wake up, you are writing a new scene. The question is not whether the world will give you a chance. The question is whether you will take your chance when it comes. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for fear to disappear, because fear never leaves first. Action comes first. And remember this deeply: your voice matters, even if it shakes. Your dreams matter, even if they feel far. Your story matters, even if no one is watching right now. One day you will look back and realize that the moment you decided not to quit, that was the moment everything changed. So keep learning, keep growing, keep trying. And when life tells you you can't, answer it with action that says, "Watch me." Because legends are not born, they are built moment by moment, choice by choice. And maybe one day, someone will say your story inspired them. Just like Shakespeare still inspires the world today, this is English Gateway, where stories end, but motivation begins.